Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a totally reformulated look at something we honestly take for granted, a genuinely calm mind. You know the type, right? Those people who just stay perfectly steady under massive pressure. We usually assume it's just a lucky roll of the genetic dice, like they were born without a stress gear, or maybe they just don't care. But looking at the psychology we're unpacking today, true calmness, it's not an accident at all. It's actually this incredibly sophisticated active system. We're talking about a highly precise blueprint of psychological defense, emotional regulation, and serious energy management.
So, let's anchor this with a core concept: emotional equilibrium. This is the active psychological mechanism of regulating responses, setting protective boundaries, and managing cognitive energy to maintain a steady mind. The key word here is active. We've really got to bust this societal myth that calm individuals are just numb or disconnected or passively letting life happen to them. Psychology shows they feel the exact same things we do: the fear, the stress, the anger. The secret isn't that they're totally numb. It's that they actively deploy specific mechanisms so they don't let those raw emotions hijack their behavior.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll be looking at the anatomy of a steady mind, the mechanics of emotional regulation, low personalization and stress resilience, setting boundaries to protect peace, efficiency over effort, and wrapping up with the power of selective discipline.
Okay, starting off with part 1, Anatomy of a Steady Mind, debunking the myth of passivity.
So let's look at the core difference in how our brains handle a crisis. On one hand, you have impulsive reacting. This is immediate, frantic, and driven entirely by our emotional centers. It's like firing off that furious email the exact millisecond you read it. On the other hand, you have deliberate responding. This is driven by the thinking part of the brain, giving you a delayed, measured action. It shows us that calmness is actually an active choice to slow down. It's deliberately separating the raw feeling of an emotion from the outward physical action you end up taking. Just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to act on it that very second.
Moving on to section 2, the mechanics of emotional regulation, the cognitive pause.
Let's look at the exact mechanical sequence inside the brain when a calm person hits a stressful wall. Step 1, they experience the raw emotion. Like we said, they aren't emotionally numb. They totally feel the heat. Step 2 is where the absolute magic happens. The brain initiates a deliberate pause. Then step 3, thanks to that tiny pause, the thinking brain has the time it needs to fully engage. In step 4, a deliberate, calculated response is selected. And you know what the most fascinating part is? Neuroscience actually shows that this simple, learned act of slowing your reactions physically lowers stress hormones in your body. It literally prevents an emotional overload just by pausing to let logic override the reflex. Crazy, right?
Which brings us to section 3, low personalization and stress resilience, the armor of experience.
People with incredibly steady minds understand one absolute truth. When other people react negatively, it almost always stems from their own stress, pressure, or insecurity, not necessarily from anything you did. Cognitive psychology actually calls this low personalization. It just means you don't automatically blame yourself for every bad interaction you have. You learn to accept uncertainty instead of constantly fighting it, which naturally drops your baseline anxiety. And this is absolutely crucial. A truly steady mind is forged in the fires of experience, not absolute comfort. Resilience is built up through repeated exposure to stress that you've navigated properly over time.
All right, section 4, setting boundaries to protect peace, external defense mechanisms.
Let's compare a healthy dynamic with a harmful one. In a healthy relationship, your limits are respected, there's mutual effort, and honestly, the biggest indicator is that your nervous system actually feels safe. But in a harmful dynamic, boundary violations happen over and over, and the whole connection relies on a one-sided drain, or worse, emotional manipulation using guilt. Look, if you consistently feel small, tense, or just totally exhausted around someone, you aren't making it up. Your nervous system is accurately detecting a harmful dynamic. It knows your foundational boundaries are being violated, and it's forcing your brain to stay locked in defense mode. So when do you deploy your ultimate defense mechanism and actually step away? You need to watch out for 4 red flags. First, constant disrespect of clearly drawn limits. Second, the use of guilt or fear to twist situations and make you feel responsible for their emotions. Third, an entirely one-sided relationship that just leaves you burnt out. And finally, harmful behavior that continues even after you've clearly communicated and given multiple chances. Over time, repeated behavior is literally the absolute strongest predictor of future behavior.
If someone is only keeping a connection with you through guilt or endless taking, your brain is just going to remain trapped in that anxious defense mode, and it will destroy your calm.
And that leads us to a really powerful realization from our sources. Peace is more important than history. You know, sometimes we stay connected to people purely because of a shared history or some deep sense of guilt. But completely stepping away from someone, yes, even family, isn't necessarily an act of anger or vengeance. Sometimes it's just a basic, structural necessity to protect your mental health and preserve your cognitive architecture.
Let's shift gears to Section 5, Efficiency over Effort, the Energy Conservation System.
We really need to clear up a major psychological misunderstanding here, because from the outside looking in, a highly tuned mind can look an awful lot like pure laziness, but the difference is massive. Physical laziness is just avoiding work entirely because of apathy or a total lack of ambition. Mental efficiency, on the other hand, which is what highly ambitious, seemingly lazy people practice, is actively resisting effort that feels inefficient, unnecessary, or disconnected from actual meaningful outcomes. People with steady, ambitious minds do not resist work. They actively resist wasted effort. They are constantly quietly calculating whether a task is actually worth the cognitive energy it's going to cost them.
Research on motivation and dopamine tells us that the brain's reward system gets energized by the anticipation of future outcomes, not by repetitive daily routines. Because their ambition is intensely focused on the future, their dopamine spikes when they picture the grand vision of success. This makes the mundane, process-oriented stepping stones feel incredibly draining in comparison. So it's not that they're unmotivated, it's just that their internal reward system is tuned to the finish line rather than the treadmill.
But this drive for the ideal outcome, it creates a massive, hidden energy drain. Having high internal standards naturally leads to perfectionism. You delay taking action because starting feels risky unless conditions are absolutely perfect. But here's the catch. While your body is sitting physically still, your mind is working overtime. It's planning, evaluating choices, predicting every potential outcome. Real, measurable cognitive energy is being heavily consumed way before you even lift a finger. So resting is often required just to recover from that prior mental fatigue. What looks like classic procrastination to a casual observer is very often just severe mental fatigue from thinking way too far ahead.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the power of selective discipline, aligning action and identity.
When we actually map out where all this energy goes, their whole strategy becomes super obvious. The core truth about the motivation of a steady mind is that it's this highly calibrated, extremely selective engine. When tasks are forced or meaningless, motivation drops to practically zero. But when a task aligns with long-term goals, boom, you see high motivation. And when a task aligns with their core identity or deeply held values, they exhibit intense, laser-like focus and can work for unbelievably long periods. Their effort depends completely on structural alignment, not just some sense of obligation. They are strategically saving their energy for the stuff that actually matters.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. Are you reacting to your life, or are you designing your peace? Take a minute today to reflect on your own psychological blueprint. Are you just letting the world, the daily stress, and draining relationships short-circuit your system? Or are you actively utilizing that cognitive pause, fiercely guarding your external boundaries, and intentionally managing your energy? The psychology is crystal clear on this one. Calmness isn't something you're just born with, it's something you actively build. So, how are you building yours?